Darnell Okafor was 41 years old, and until 8 months after his divorce was finalized, he thought the worst was already behind him. He had built his freight logistics company from nothing, from night shifts and an uncle's auto shop in Akron, into a 7-figure federal contracting firm that nobody saw coming, including his ex-wife, Brianna. She had taken the house, the settlement check, and 11 years of his best years when she signed those papers. Darnell let her. What Brianna did not know was that 3 months after the ink dried, the federal contract he had been quietly negotiating for 2 years finally closed, and it changed everything. So when she arrived at his private hangar with her attorney, dressed like she had already won, demanding her share of a jet she had no legal claim to, she was standing in front of a man she had never actually known. She believed she was looking at the same patient, overlooked man she had left behind. She had no idea what he had already found, and what he was already building against her. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The hangar smelled like jet fuel and cold concrete. Darnell Okafor crouched beside the front landing gear of the Cessna Citation CJ-3 Pils and ran 2 fingers along the strut assembly the way his uncle Raymond had taught him to check a brake caliper. Slow, deliberate, trusting his hands before his eyes. The plane was white, with a thin charcoal stripe running the length of the fuselage. Clean, precise, not flashy. He had not chosen it to make a statement. He had chosen it because it was the right tool for what his business needed now. And Darnell Okafor had always chosen tools that way. He was wearing work boots, dark jeans, a plain navy jacket with no logo on it. His charter crew, 2 men who had worked hangars longer than Darnell had owned anything worth keeping, moved around the aircraft at a respectful distance, running their own pre-flight checks. Nobody was performing for anybody. That was how Darnell liked it. He stood up and looked at the plane for a moment. 41 years old. A hangar outside Columbus, Ohio. A jet with his company's tail number on the registration. He allowed himself 3 full seconds to feel the weight of that. Then he moved on to the port engine housing. There was a version of Darnell Okafor that existed before all of this, before the contracts, before the condo, before the jet. And that version of him smelled like motor oil and spent his Saturdays lying under other people's cars in a shop off South Arlington Road in Akron. His uncle Raymond had run that shop for 30 years. Raymond was not a warm man, but he was a precise one, and he believed that a person who could not fix something with their hands had no business claiming they understood it. Darnell had absorbed that lesson so completely it became his personality. He had put himself through business school on a partial academic scholarship, and 4 years of overnight logistics work for a regional freight carrier. He had graduated without ceremony, no family trip, no dinner out, because there was no money for ceremony and because, honestly, the degree was just the next tool. He had built his consultancy from a side operation running out of a spare bedroom into a full freight and charter logistics firm over 15 years, methodically, quietly, the way you build anything that lasts. He had married Brianna Whitfield at 30. She was 39 now, and she had been extraordinary, not beautiful in the way people meant when they used the word carelessly, but arresting. She could walk into a room full of strangers, and within 20 minutes have 3 of them convinced she was the most important person there. She had laughed at his jokes before he was funny enough to deserve it. She had believed in him, or performed belief so precisely, that Darnell, a man who read people like logistics manifests, could not find the seam. By year 7, the laughter stopped first. Then the dinners. Then the pretense of shared direction. The coldness that settled between them had arrived without announcement and without a specific cause he could identify. And that absence of cause had bothered him more than the coldness itself. A man who solves problems needs to know where the problem is. The divorce was finalized 8 months ago. Brianna's attorney, a silver-haired man named Harlan Freed, who carried himself like a closing argument, had pushed hard for half of everything. Kwame had pushed back harder, with documentation. The final settlement gave Brianna the marital home in Dublin, one of the vehicles, and a negotiated lump sum payout. She had signed the papers at the conference table with her jaw set and her eyes saying something her mouth was too controlled to finish. 3 months after that, Darnell's firm was awarded a federal freight contract he had been quietly pursuing for 2 years. The kind of contract that doesn't just change a quarter, it changes what is possible. The jet was the most visible piece of what came after. A business asset registered under a company subsidiary. The tail number filed in his firm's name. He was at the hangar for a routine pre-flight inspection, nothing more than that, when his phone buzzed against his thigh. He pulled it out. Kwame. He answered. "Hey." Kwame's voice came back careful, measured in a way that meant he had already thought through what he was about to say. "She's on her way. With Harlan Freed." The hangar air felt slightly colder than it had a moment ago. Darnell did not curse. He did not move. He asked the only question that mattered right now. "How long do I have?" 20 minutes, maybe less. He ended the call. He stood looking at the jet, at the clean white fuselage, at the tail number, at everything it represented and everything it had cost him to get here. And he allowed himself exactly 5 seconds of something that lived in his chest, like grief. Then he scrolled to Ingrid's number and pressed call. She picked up on the second ring. He said 2 words. "They're coming." She arrived in a black SUV that parked just outside the hangar entrance with the quiet precision of something rehearsed. Darnell saw her before she saw him. He had positioned himself near the nose of the plane, visible from the entrance, and he watched her step down from the vehicle the way he watched a lot of things, without moving, without expression, cataloging what he needed to know. She had dressed for this. That was the first thing. The coat was camel-colored, tailored close at the shoulders, the kind of coat that cost more than a car payment, and was chosen because it read as serious without reading as aggressive. Her hair was flawless. Her heels were low enough to walk on tarmac. Every detail intentional. She had thought about what to wear to this moment, which meant she had been planning this moment for longer than today. Harlan Freed stepped out behind her. Mid-50s. Silver hair swept back from a sharp face. He carried a leather portfolio against his ribs, like a man who had learned that the weight of documents is its own kind of authority. A younger associate followed, a woman in her late 20s, already holding a legal pad, pen uncapped, taking notes before anything had been said. Darnell did not move toward the hangar office. He did not gesture inside. He stayed where he was, on the tarmac, on his property, and he let them walk to him. When Brianna got close enough, she smiled. It was a good smile. It had always been a good smile, the kind that arrived in the eyes first and made you feel like you were the only person in the room worth looking at. Darnell had loved that smile once. Now he observed it the way he observed a weather report. "D," she said. The old nickname, soft, warm, like no time had passed and none of it had been ugly. "Hey." His voice was even, nothing given away. "You look good." She glanced at the jet behind him. And this, a small, genuine-seeming breath of admiration. "I mean it. I'm really happy for you." Darnell said nothing. He waited. She held the smile for 2 more seconds, then gave the slightest nod to her left. That was the signal. Freed stepped forward and took over the way attorneys do, smoothly, like the conversation had always been heading here. "Mr. Okafor." Freed's voice was the polished baritone of a man who had made a career of sounding reasonable while saying unreasonable things. "We appreciate your time. I'll be direct." He was not direct. He was thorough, which is a different thing. He walked through the argument in full. Darnell's federal contract had entered active negotiation during the final year of the marriage. a period when marital assets and business opportunities were, under Ohio law, subject to equitable consideration. The aircraft, acquired 3 months post-contract with capital that could be traced to a business opportunity that existed during the marital period, represented what Freed called a potentially undisclosed appreciable asset. He used the phrase twice. He let it hang in the air each time the way attorneys let things hang. Not as a question, but as a weight they are placing on the other side of a scale. The younger associate's pen moved steadily. Darnell stood with his hands loose at his sides and his face giving Freed absolutely nothing to work with. He listened to every word. He let Freed reach the end of it, the suggestion of a motion to revisit the settlement, the language about good faith disclosure obligations, the delicate implication that this could go several directions depending on how cooperative everyone chose to be. When the silence arrived, Darnell said one word: Kwame. Kwame Asante stepped forward from the side of the hangar where he had been standing, unhurried, for the last 14 minutes. He had a leather folio of his own. He opened it before he reached them, and he addressed Freed the way a man addresses a problem he identified some time ago and has since resolved. The contract in question was executed 14 weeks after the divorce was finalized. The full record of pre-negotiation activity, every communication, every preliminary filing, every interagency correspondence, was disclosed to opposing counsel in the settlement proceedings per Ohio Revised Code 3105.70.1. All of it, stamped and dated. He produced a tabbed document and held it out to Freed without ceremony. Any claim that the disclosure was insufficient will be answered with that file, in court, in public, at whatever cost that proceeding requires. I want to be clear about the at whatever cost part. Freed took the document. He opened it. He read the first page. Something shifted in his posture, barely visible, but there. A slight redistribution of weight. A recalibration. The associate stopped writing. Brianna was looking at Kwame with an expression that was trying to remain composed and not entirely succeeding. The warmth was draining out of her face, the way color leaves something left too long in the sun. She had not expected him to already be here. She had not expected any of this to already be built. Darnell waited until he had her eyes. Then he spoke directly to her. Not to Freed, not to the associate with the legal pad. To her. You signed the papers, Brianna. His voice was quiet, calm as a measurement. You got what the law said you were owed. That's done. He let his gaze move to the jet, to the hangar, to all of it, then back to her. This is mine. He turned and walked back toward the plane, over his shoulder, without turning around. Kwame will handle the rest. Behind him, he heard nothing. No argument. No follow-up from Freed. No parting warmth from Brianna. He didn't need to turn around to know her face. The smile was gone. The condo was quiet. Darnell had changed out of the navy jacket and was sitting at his desk in a plain white t-shirt, a glass of water untouched at his elbow. The city hummed somewhere below the window. He barely heard it. Kwame had forwarded everything by 7. The full disclosure file, Freed's correspondence, the communication timestamps, the original settlement documentation, the motion language Freed had apparently drafted but never filed. Darnell went through it the way he went through every logistics audit, page by page, in order. Nothing skipped. He was looking for the shape of the thing, for where the pressure had been applied and where it had been expected to hold. Most of it was what he expected. Freed had been fishing. The argument about the contract was thin. Kwame had been right that it wouldn't survive contact with a judge. There were a few highlighted items, a few flagged pages. He worked through them steadily. Then he reached the property transaction summary near the back of the file. He stopped. He read it once. Then he read it again, slower. The marital home on Highfield Road in Dublin, Ohio. Appraised at $610,000 at the time of settlement. Brianna had received it as part of the divorce agreement. Her choice, one she had pushed for with particular firmness through Freed during negotiations. Darnell had let it go. The house meant something to her, or so he had believed. He had taken the lump sum and the cleaner exit. 4 months ago, that house was sold to Troy Whitfield for $190,000. The transaction was dated 6 days after Brianna signed the divorce papers. Darnell set the page down on the desk. He picked up his water glass, drank slowly, and set it back down. He was a logistics man. He had spent 15 years tracking the movement of cargo, capital, and contracts across systems that looked simple on the surface and revealed their true shape only when you followed every line back to its origin. He understood flow. He understood that money does not move without a reason, and that the reason is always worth finding. A $610,000 asset sold to a family member for $190,000 6 days after settlement papers were signed was not a family discount. It was a transfer, which meant the question was not why she sold it cheap. The question was, where did the other $420,000 go? And when did it go there? He picked up his phone and called Ingrid. She answered on the second ring, which meant she had been expecting the call. "You saw the property transaction," she said. It was not a question. "Talk to me." A pause, the sound of papers shifting. "Darnell, I've been sitting on something. I didn't want to bring it to you until I had it fully mapped. After today," another pause. "I think it's time." "Go ahead." 2 LLCs, filed in Delaware, both during the final years of the marriage. Her voice was steady and precise, the way it always was when the numbers were doing something she needed him to understand completely. They're registered to addresses tied to Brianna's family. One is tied to a property in Cincinnati. I ran the registered agents. They're both shell structures. Clean filings, nothing unusual on the surface. When were they filed? First one, about 4 years before the divorce. Second one, roughly 2 years out. Darnell was quiet. The accounts connected to both entities showed zero activity for a long time. Ingrid continued. No transactions, no incoming, nothing that would trip a flag in a routine review. But 8 months ago, right around when the settlement was finalized, she stopped. "They started moving," Darnell said. "Yes." He leaned back in his chair. The ceiling was white and offered nothing. He looked at it anyway. "How much?" he asked. "I'm still tracing it. I wanted to be sure before I gave you a number. I'll have something more complete in 48 hours. "All right," he said. "Don't talk to anyone else about this." "I know," she said quietly. "I know." He ended the call. For a long time he sat, without moving. The documents were spread across the desk in front of him, neat piles, time-stamped, organized. All the paperwork of a life he had believed was one thing, and was beginning to understand, was another. He did not call Brianna. He did not call Kwame. He called his mother. Paulette Okafor answered on the third ring, her voice carrying the specific warmth she reserved only for him. Low, unhurried, already paying attention. "Hey, baby." "Mama." He exhaled slowly through his nose. "You got a few minutes?" "I got all the minutes you need." He told her everything. From the hangar that morning to the property transaction to Ingrid's call. He laid it out in order, the way he laid everything out. No drama, no editorializing. Just the facts arranged so the shape of them was visible. She did not interrupt once. When he finished, the line was quiet for a moment. Then Paulette said, "How long has she been planning this, baby?" "I don't know yet," Darnell said. His voice was even, quiet. "But I'm going to find out." He stayed on the phone with her a little while longer without saying much. Then he said goodnight, set the phone face down on the desk, and sat in the dark with the documents still open in front of him, thinking. The call started at 7:15 in the morning. Darnell had been up since 5. Coffee made, desk cleared, the disclosure documents reorganized into 3 separate piles. He had slept 4 hours, maybe 5. It was enough. Ingrid joined the line first. Kwame connected 30 seconds later. No greetings, no small talk. Darnell spoke first. "We are building a complete financial timeline," he said. "Everything. The marriage, the business accounts, the vendors, the LLCs, all of it, mapped from the beginning. Nothing gets filed. Nothing gets moved. Not until the picture is whole." Kwame's voice was calm. "Understood." Ingrid said, "I'll need access to the archived billing records from years 4 through 11. I have most of it, but I want the raw data, not the summaries." "You'll have it by noon," Darnell said. That was Monday. By Thursday, the shape of it was starting to show. They worked through a shared document thread, Ingrid flagging financial anomalies, Kwame organizing them by legal category, Darnell reading through every entry in silence and asking precise, narrow questions when something needed clarifying. It was slow work, careful work, the kind of work that only made sense if you were committed to getting it exactly right. And slowly, year by year, the timeline built itself. Year 4, Year 6, Year 7. Year 7 was where the first LLC had been filed. Darnell already knew that, but seeing it laid out on a timeline alongside everything else, alongside the gradual cooling of the marriage, alongside the first long silences and canceled dinners and separate schedules, made it land differently. He had always assumed the distance between them had grown naturally. Two busy people, two separate rhythms pulling apart. He had been wrong. The distance had not grown. It had been managed. He kept reading. Years 8 and 9 showed something subtler, but just as deliberate. During that stretch, Brianna had pushed, gently, always gently, for Darnell to restructure the company. She had brought it up 4 separate times. He could trace it now through emails she had sent, through dinner-time conversations he had logged in his own old messages as innocent enough discussions about the next phase of the business. Each time, she had pointed him toward partnership structures, outside investors, shared ownership arrangements with contacts she knew or had introduced. Each arrangement, if he had accepted it, would have diluted his equity in the firm. Each time, he had declined. His gut had told him no without knowing why. He understood why now. A diluted ownership stake was a smaller asset in a divorce. She had been trying to shrink what he was building before she walked away with her share of it. He had not let her. Not because he suspected her. He had not suspected anything. He had declined because he was a man who did not share what he built, unless the terms were right. That discipline, the same one he had carried since the auto shop in Akron, had protected him without his knowledge. He wrote nothing in the margin. He just moved to the next page. The second revelation came on Friday afternoon. Ingrid's voice on the call was quiet and precise in the way it got when she had found something she wished she hadn't. "I've been cross-referencing the vendor payment records against the LLC account activity," she said. One of the Delaware entities, the first one, the one filed in Year 7, received 6 wire transfers during the final 18 months of the marriage. Darnell said, "Source? A consulting account in Brianna's name. The one you told me was connected to her interior design work." He knew the account. He had known about it the entire marriage. He had never looked closely at it because he had never had a reason to. She had kept her work separate from his. That was how they had structured things early on, and he had respected it. "How much?" he asked. $214,000. Total. Across the 6 transfers. He didn't speak. Ingrid continued. "The money originated from vendor overpayments inside your company's billing system. I went back through the invoices." She paused. "Every vendor involved was someone Brianna brought to the business herself. Friends of friends, family connections, people she vouched for personally." Darnell looked at the wall. The invoices billed for services. The services were either inflated significantly or never performed at all. The surplus was routed out through the consulting account and into the LLC. She said it plainly, without editorial. That was Ingrid's way. But the plainness of it made it land harder, not softer. He had hired her vendors because she had recommended them, because he trusted her judgment the way you trust the judgment of someone you have built a life beside. That trust had been the open door. She had walked through it, quietly and repeatedly, for 18 months. He sat with it for a moment. Then he set the documents down flat on the desk, stood up, and walked to the window. The city was gray and ordinary outside, cars moving, a delivery truck double-parked on the corner. He picked up his phone and called Kwame directly. "This isn't divorce litigation," Darnell said. "This is fraud." Kwame's response came without hesitation. "I know. I've already contacted a forensic accountant, and I've spoken to a federal crimes attorney. Who else knows? Just us. And Ingrid." Darnell watched the delivery truck pull away from the curb. "Keep it that way," he said. The call to Troy Whitfield lasted 4 minutes. Darnell kept it simple. He told Troy he was looking at a commercial real estate acquisition on the east side of Columbus. Nothing specific, just exploring the market, and that he remembered Troy knew the area well. He said he valued the opinion of someone with boots on the ground. Troy said he'd love to help. He said it fast, the way people do when they're flattered and trying not to show it. They agreed on lunch the next day, a steakhouse downtown that Troy suggested. Darnell said that worked fine. He hung up and sat quietly for a moment. Then he went back to his documents. Troy Whitfield arrived 3 minutes late, which was probably his version of on time. He was broad-shouldered, easy smiling, dressed in a sport coat that was one size too new. The kind of thing a man wore when he wanted to signal he was doing well, without being too obvious about it. He shook Darnell's hand with both of his. Warm, familiar. "D-man, you look good," Troy said, settling into the chair across from him. "I mean it. Whatever you're doing, it's working." "Just keeping busy," Darnell said. He meant it the same way Troy meant "I love to help," which was to say he meant none of it. But he said it with a full smile, easy and unhurried, and Troy visibly relaxed. That was what Darnell needed. A relaxed man talks. A relaxed man fills every silence without thinking about what he's putting into it. They ordered. Troy got a ribeye without looking at the menu. Darnell got the salmon and a water. Troy started talking about the Columbus market within 2 minutes. Cap rates, neighborhood comps, a mixed-use corridor on the east side that was absolutely about to pop. He used his hands when he talked. He repeated certain phrases: smart money, ground floor, long runway, the way someone does when they've been pitching the same idea to multiple people, and the language has gotten worn smooth from use. Darnell asked questions. Not many. Just enough to keep the current moving. "What's driving activity out there? Are you seeing a lot of outside capital or mostly local? What does anchor financing usually look like on a mid-sized development play?" Troy loved every question. He answered each one with the confidence of a man who had finally found the right audience. The appetizers came. A shrimp cocktail for Troy. Darnell had ordered a side salad he had no intention of eating. Somewhere between the shrimp and the entrees, the conversation shifted the way Darnell had known it would if he was patient enough. Troy leaned back in his chair, took a long sip of his drink, and said with the casual pride of a man who couldn't help himself, "I've actually got my own project moving right now. A development play me and Bree have been building toward for a while." Darnell nodded slowly. He picked up his water glass. "Real estate development," he said. It was not a question. "Yeah, we've been working on the structure for a while, putting together investors, finalizing the land play." Troy shrugged, like he was downplaying it. He wasn't downplaying it. "It's a solid project. Good bones." "What property are you anchoring on?" Darnell asked. Troy reached for another shrimp. Something shifted in him. A beat, brief enough that most people would have missed it entirely. His hand moved, his jaw set, and then the smile came back. "That house," he said. "The one on Highfield." He said it the way you say something when you've decided it's fine. Like he'd asked himself a quick question and answered it before the words came out. Darnell kept his expression exactly where it was. Curious, mild, interested. The house on Highfield. The marital home. The one appraised at $610,000. The one Brianna had signed over in the divorce settlement and then sold to Troy 6 days later for $190,000. The house that had been sitting at the center of the financial picture like a load-bearing wall since the moment Darnell first saw the transaction record. He saw the whole shape of it now. Not as a guess, as a structure. The development deal had not been something Troy and Brianna cooked up after the divorce. It had been the reason for the sale, the reason for the price. The artificially low transfer had moved a $610,000 asset into the project at $190,000, a discount that created equity to be built on, a seed capital position funded entirely by the value Darnell had spent years building in that house. The divorce was not what it had looked like. It was not two people ending something that had stopped working. It was an exit with a destination already mapped. A structure built around a funding source who had not been told he was funding anything. Darnell had been the funding source. He asked Troy 2 more questions about the development timeline. Reasonable questions, interested questions. Troy answered both of them and ordered a second drink. The entrees came. Darnell ate his salmon. Troy ate his steak. The conversation moved on to the Columbus market again, to a new mixed-use project near the Arena District, to football, to nothing in particular. When the check arrived, Darnell picked it up without discussion. "Send me the development prospectus when it's ready," he told Troy, pulling on his jacket. "I want to take a look at it." Troy's face lit up. "Absolutely, man. I'll get that to you." They shook hands at the door. Troy's grip was warm and easy. He did not notice anything. The car was quiet and still in the parking garage. Darnell sat behind the wheel with the engine off. He let one long, slow breath out through his nose. Then he started the car. He pulled out of the garage and onto the street, and he drove directly to his mother's house. Paulette Okafor opened the door before Darnell finished climbing the porch steps. She took one look at his face and said nothing. She simply turned and walked back toward the kitchen, and he followed her inside, pulling the door shut behind him. She didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't ask if he was okay. She already knew the answer to both. And she was not a woman who asked questions she already knew the answers to. The house smelled the way it always had. Coffee and something faintly floral. The same plug-in air freshener she had used for 20 years, in every house she'd lived in. The hallway light was the soft yellow of a 40-watt bulb. A stack of library books sat on the side table near the door, a cloth bookmark tucked neatly into the top one. Darnell sat down at the kitchen table, the same table he'd sat at as a teenager doing homework, the same chairs, or close enough to them. A ceramic fruit bowl in the center, with 2 oranges and a banana going soft on one side. Paulette filled the coffee maker without looking at him. She moved the way she always moved, deliberate, unhurried, like a woman who had long ago decided that rushing was a form of disrespect to whatever needed doing. She set 2 mugs on the table and sat down across from him. "Start from the beginning," she said. So he did. He told her about the hangar, about Brianna arriving dressed for a performance, and Freed beside her with the leather portfolio and the legal argument about the federal contract. He told her how Kwame had already been there, already positioned, and how the argument had collapsed in about 4 minutes once the documentation hit the table. Paulette listened. Her hands were wrapped around her mug. He told her about the house, the $610,000 appraisal, the $190,000 sale. 6 days after the settlement was signed, Troy's name on the transaction. He told her about the Delaware LLCs. The two entities filed during the marriage, sitting quiet and empty until the divorce was done, and then suddenly active. He told her about the vendors, about the invoices run through his own billing system, about the consulting account Brianna controlled, the one he thought paid for fabric samples and client meetings, and whatever else went into building someone's living room, about the 6-wire transfers, about the $214,000, about the fact that every single vendor in the scheme was someone Brianna had introduced him to. Friends of friends, family connections, people she vouched for personally. He had hired them because she said they were good. He had trusted her judgment because she was his wife. Paulette didn't flinch. She just listened. Then he told her about lunch, about Troy's sport coat and his second drink, and the way he'd said that house, the one on Highfield, like he'd done a quick calculation and decided it was fine. About how the development deal wasn't something they'd cooked up after the marriage ended. It had been the destination. The divorce was the road that got them there. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Paulette looked at him steadily. "What are you going to do?" Darnell turned his mug slowly on the table. "I'm going to wait." She didn't react. She let him continue. "They're not done building," he said. "The development deal is still in motion. Troy's out there courting investors. Brianna is positioning herself as part of a legitimate real estate venture." He paused. "If I move right now, if Kwame files anything today, she folds the LLCs before anything gets frozen. Troy transfers whatever he can. They separate and scatter, and the money gets harder to trace and harder to recover." He looked up. "But if I wait until the deal is almost closed, until investor capital is fully committed, until every dollar is sitting in one visible structure with her name connected to it, and then we show exactly where the seed money came from and how it got there, the whole thing comes apart at the same time. Not just for her, for Troy, for every investor who tied themselves to this deal. Maximum exposure, all at once. No place to move anything because everyone is looking at everything simultaneously." He set his mug down. 8 weeks, maybe 10. Paulette was quiet for a long moment. She looked at her coffee. Then she looked at her son. "Your grandfather used to say," she began, her voice low and even, "never move until the other person has already lost." A small pause. "They just don't know it yet." Darnell held her gaze. Then he nodded once. He finished his coffee slowly. The kitchen stayed quiet around him, warm and still. The refrigerator hummed. The banana in the fruit bowl was going soft. After a while, he stood up, pushed in his chair, and kissed the top of his mother's head. He drove home with the windows down, and the city moving past him in the dark, and the plan sitting fully formed and perfectly still inside his chest. 7 weeks into the wait, his phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon. He was at his desk reviewing a freight routing proposal when the name appeared on the screen. "Brianna." He let it ring once. Then he answered on the second ring, voice easy and neutral. "Hey." "Hey." A small pause, carefully placed. "Is this a bad time?" "No," he said. "Go ahead." She took a breath, audible, measured, the kind of breath that announces something rehearsed. "I wanted to call and say I'm sorry for showing up at the hangar like that." Another pause. "With Freed. That wasn't fair to you. It wasn't the right move." "I appreciate that," Darnell said. "The marriage wasn't all your fault." Her voice shifted into something softer, more careful. "I know I had my part in it. There were things I could have done differently. Said differently." She let that land for a moment. I hope we can be civil. Going forward. I don't want there to be bad blood between us." "There's no bad blood on my end," he said. "I think it's good that you called." "Yeah?" "Yeah." He kept his voice warm, relaxed, the voice of a man who had moved on and arrived somewhere peaceful. "Life's too short for all that. We both have things we're building. That's what matters. She exhaled, genuine relief in it, or a very good impression of genuine relief. I'm glad to hear you say that. I really am. Take care of yourself, Brianna. You too, Darnell. He set the phone down on the desk. He sat with the silence for a moment. He felt no anger, no sadness, no warmth left over from the sound of her voice. What he felt was the specific, clean sensation of a hypothesis confirmed. The call was reconnaissance dressed as remorse. She had come to the hangar and found a wall, and now she needed to know if that wall had softened. She needed to know how much he knew and how he was carrying it. He had told her nothing, and she had understood that as reassurance. Good. He pulled the freight routing proposal back in front of him and returned to work. 3 days later, Ingrid called. He could tell from the first second of silence, just a half beat longer than usual, that she wasn't calling about quarterly projections. I found something, she said. Talk to me. I've been cross-referencing the vendor invoices against the state business registration records. Her voice was flat and precise, the way it always got when the numbers had shown her something she didn't want to be true. The primary vendor, the one the $140,000 ran through. What about it? Darnell. A pause. It was registered in year 4. He didn't say anything. Not year 7. Not during the cold period. Not when things were already falling apart. Ingrid's voice stayed steady, but something underneath it pulled tight. Year 4. While the company was still mid-climb. While the marriage was, by all accounts, still intact. He set down the pen he'd been holding. Year 4. He knew exactly what year 4 looked like. He could still feel it if he reached back far enough. The 16-hour days. The cargo contracts that kept almost tipping into something bigger. The nights he'd come home, tired down to the bone, and she'd have dinner on the table and ask him how the meetings went. The weekends when they drove out to look at neighborhoods they couldn't quite afford yet. Walking through houses, talking about what they were going to build. The flowers he brought home on a random Thursday because he felt good about a contract lead and he wanted her to know it. Year 4. Who registered it? He asked. His voice was completely level. The registered agent is a name I don't recognize, likely a nominee. Ingrid paused, but the mailing address on the filing links back to the same Delaware cluster as the other 2 LLCs. It's connected. It's hers. The room was very quiet. He sat with the document in front of him, the registration printout Ingrid had attached to the file. The date in the upper right corner. Clear as anything. He read it once. He read it again. He read it a third time. The same numbers. The same year. Not an error. Not a misprint. She had built the structure of theft before the marriage ever showed a crack. Before the long silences, before the separate schedule, before any of the things he had spent 8 months cataloging as the slow, natural failure of 2 people growing apart. There was no slow, natural failure. There was a plan, patient and quiet, and running underneath everything, the whole time, while he worked and trusted and brought her flowers and believed, completely, fully believed, that they were building something together. He set the document down on the desk. He looked at the wall for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Kwame. His old friend answered on the first ring. Kwame. Darnell's voice was calm, precise, exactly as steady as it had been at the hangar, at the lunch table, on the call with Brianna 3 days ago. I want everything ready, he said. Not in 8 weeks. A beat. In 4. The private room at Meridian was exactly the kind of space that made money feel inevitable. Dark walnut panels, soft overhead lighting that turned everything warm and flattering. A long rectangular table set for 14, with water glasses already filled, and a small arrangement of white flowers at the center that managed to look both tasteful and expensive. The kind of room where deals got made not because the numbers were perfect, but because the atmosphere said they were. Brianna had chosen it deliberately. She understood rooms the way some people understood languages, fluently, instinctively, with a native speaker's ear for what each detail communicated. She stood near the far end of the table in a deep burgundy dress, one hand resting lightly on the back of a chair, talking to a gray-haired man named Ellison, who had made his money in warehouse distribution. She was asking about his grandchildren. She had remembered their names from a conversation 6 weeks ago. That was not an accident. Nothing Brianna did in a room like this was an accident. Troy was at the front, adjusting the projection screen. He had the nervous, slightly over-eager energy of a man who knew this was the biggest pitch of his career and was trying very hard not to show it. His suit was new. His slides were clean. He had rehearsed the deck 14 times in the past 2 weeks. 12 guests were seated or standing with drinks in hand. 10 men, 2 women. Most were in their 50s. All of them had money to deploy and the particular kind of confidence that comes from having deployed it successfully before. 2 had already committed. The other 4 were the ones that mattered tonight. The pitch ran 40 minutes. Troy was good. Better than Darnell would have expected, if Darnell had been there to see it. He walked the room through the Highfield parcel, the location, the zoning variance, the projected residential build-out, the comparable sales in the corridor. His numbers were clean. His projected return was conservative enough to seem credible and strong enough to seem worth the call. Brianna spoke once, briefly, about the community development angle, the kind of language that made investors feel like their money was doing something noble alongside something profitable. She delivered it without overselling, just the right amount of warmth, just the right amount of substance. When Troy clicked to the final slide, the room felt like a held breath about to release. "Happy to open it up," Troy said, clicking off the projector. "Questions? Thoughts? The floor is yours." A few people spoke. One asked about the zoning timeline. One asked about the general contractor. Standard questions. The kind a prepared team answers without breaking stride. Then the man 3 seats from the end of the table set down his water glass and spoke. "I have one." His voice was unhurried, almost bored, the way a man sounds when he already knows the answer to what he's about to ask. "Can you walk me through the capitalization of the seed asset? Specifically, the acquisition of the anchor property and the source of the purchase funds?" Troy blinked. "Sure, yeah. The anchor property was acquired through a private family transaction at $190,000, the man said. Calm, precise. "Yes, I saw that in the materials." He opened the leather portfolio in front of him. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. He simply removed 3 documents and placed them on the table in a row, one after the other, with the deliberate care of a man who had been waiting a long time to set them down. The first was an appraisal report. The number at the top was $610,000. The property address was Highfield. The second was a transaction record. The same address. A different number. $190,000. The buyer's name was Troy Whitfield. The date was 6 days after a divorce settlement was signed. The third document was longer. A summary, dense with dates and dollar amounts and entity names. Delaware LLCs, vendor invoices, wire transfers. A total figure near the bottom, underlined $214,000. A timeline spanning 4 years. Kwame Asante looked up from the documents and addressed the room. Not Brianna, not Troy. The room. The seed capital for this project was extracted from a logistics firm through fraudulent vendor invoicing over approximately 4 years. The anchor property was acquired through a transaction structured to convert marital equity into private investment capital at a fraction of its appraised value. He paused to let that settle. Every investor at this table is now materially connected to those facts. I would strongly recommend that each of you speak to your own attorney before this evening concludes. The room did not erupt. It went still. The specific, airless stillness of 12 people recalculating everything they had heard in the last 40 minutes. One of the already committed investors, Ellison, the warehouse man Brianna had charmed with his grandchildren's names, reached across the table and quietly asked for a copy of the document. A woman at the far end did the same. Neither of them looked at Brianna when they asked. Troy turned toward Kwame. When he said the name, it came out like a word he didn't recognize. Kwame? Brianna said nothing. She was looking at the 3 documents laid out on the table in front of her. The appraisal, the transaction record, the summary with the dates running all the way back to year 4. Her face had not moved, but something behind it had. For the first time, she was looking at the full shape of what had been built against her. Not a threat, not a legal maneuver, not a bluff. And she understood, with complete and sudden clarity, exactly whose hands had built it. She knocked at 8:47 in the morning. Darnell had been awake since 6. He had made coffee, reviewed 2 contracts, and eaten breakfast at his kitchen counter like it was any other Tuesday. When he heard the knock, he set his mug down, walked to the door, and opened it. Brianna stood in the hallway alone. No Freed, no Troy, no young associate with a notepad, just her, in dark jeans and a gray coat, her hair pulled back. She looked like she hadn't slept much. She looked like she had spent the drive over deciding exactly what she was going to say. Darnell stepped aside without a word. She walked in. She didn't wait long before she let it out. That was an ambush. Her voice was tight, controlled, but only barely. You had him in that room. You set the whole thing up, and you let it happen in front of 12 people, Darnell. You humiliated me. She was moving as she talked. Not pacing exactly, but she couldn't stand still. Her hands moved with her words. You could have come to me. You could have called. You had questions about the house, about Troy, about whatever you think you found. You could have picked up the phone. Instead, you sent your attorney into a dinner with investors and blew everything up like, are you finished? Not sharp, not cold, just a question. She stopped. He pulled out a chair from the kitchen table and sat down. He did not invite her to sit. He did not raise his voice. He simply folded his hands on the table and looked at her, the way a man looks at something he has already fully understood. Sit down if you want, he said. But either way, I'm going to walk through this. She stood, arms crossed, jaw tight. He started at the beginning. Year 4. The ghost vendor, a small consulting entity, registered to an address connected to her family, created 14 months into what Darnell had believed was the most stable stretch of their marriage. He had still been working double shifts building the firm. He had trusted her introductions because she was his wife, and that was what trust looked like. He walked through the invoicing structure. The way vendor payments ran through his billing system, slightly inflated, routed back through the LLC accounts, clean enough not to trigger anything at a glance, built by someone who understood how he operated, because she had been watching him operate for years. The 6 wire transfers, the $214,000, the Delaware LLCs that stayed dormant until the moment the divorce papers were signed, like timers that had been waiting to start. Then, the house. The $610,000 property transferred to Troy for $190,000 6 days after she signed the settlement. The development deal that required a low-cost anchor property to make the returns work. A deal that existed before the ink on those papers was dry, before, most likely, she ever asked for a divorce at all. Then, the phone call. 3 days before investors' night. The apology, the warmth, the careful, calibrated sincerity. That call wasn't about clearing the air, he said. You wanted to know where I was, whether I was watching, whether I had figured it out. He said it plainly, without heat. That was reconnaissance. Her jaw tightened. The marriage failed, Darnell. I had needs that— I hear that, he said. He did not flinch from it. And we can have a conversation about the marriage if that's what you want. But the vendor in year 4 doesn't have anything to do with your needs. It has to do with the decision you made when things were still good, when I was still bringing you flowers. He let that land. The marriage didn't drive you to this. You were already doing this. You were never home. Her voice climbed slightly. You were working constantly, building your business, and I was just— You were building too, he said. Just not with me. Silence. She shifted her weight. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped. I gave you 11 years, Darnell. He looked at her steadily. You gave me 4, he said. After that, you were waiting for the number to get big enough. The air in the room changed. Something went out of her posture. Not collapse, but deflation. The kind that happens when a person runs out of angles. After a moment, she asked, What do you want from me? Nothing. He said it simply. You already took what you believed you were owed. Now, the people whose job it is to have opinions about fraud are going to form those opinions. That's between you and them. He stood, walked to the front door, and opened it. She crossed the room slowly, stopped in the doorway. She didn't look back at him right away. When she did, there was no strategy in her face, no warmth calibrated for effect, just something quiet and tired and stripped of all its polish. You were good to me, she said. It was the first genuinely true thing she had said in years. Darnell looked at her evenly. I know. He closed the door. The development deal was dead inside of 2 weeks. It didn't collapse loudly. It came apart the way a careful structure always does when the foundation gets pulled, quietly at first, then all at once. 3 of the committed investors consulted their own attorneys after leaving the dinner. All 3 withdrew. The 4th never responded to Troy's follow-up calls. The pitch deck, the projected returns, the polished presentation Brianna had spent months building, none of it mattered once people understood what was underneath it. Troy called Darnell 6 days after the dinner. His voice had lost all of its easy warmth. He cooperated fully. It turned out that a man facing co-defendant exposure for his role in a fraudulent property transfer moves very quickly toward self-preservation. Troy gave Kwame everything: text messages, emails, a phone recording he hadn't mentioned before, and a signed statement detailing the timeline of the development plan, including the conversations with Brianna that took place while she was still Darnell's wife. His cooperation was not an act of conscience. It was arithmetic. But the result was the same. A paper trail so precise and complete that Brianna's attorneys had almost nothing left to argue around. Freed withdrew first. The letter cited a conflict of interest and arrived by courier. Brianna cycled through 2 more attorneys after that. One who lasted 3 weeks, one who lasted less than 2. The 3rd attorney, a woman out of Cincinnati, was the one who finally sat Brianna down and told her the honest truth about what the evidence looked like and what a trial would cost her in every sense of the word. The settlement was reached on a Wednesday morning. It was not the settlement Brianna would have chosen. A structured repayment agreement for the full $214,000 drawn against assets she actually held. Civil fraud findings entered into the public record. Not buried, not softened, not negotiated into something that could be misread. Her name on a permanent legal document trail that would surface in any background check, any due diligence review, any search conducted by anyone with a reason to look. The Delaware LLCs were dissolved. The Highfield development never broke ground. Darnell was not in the room when the papers were signed. He didn't need to be. Within the month, Brianna moved back to her family's home in Cincinnati. The house on Highfield, the one that started all of it, sat in legal limbo for another 3 months before it was ultimately liquidated as part of the repayment structure. The number it sold for was close to its actual appraised value. Darnell noted that without feeling much about it. She was not imprisoned. There were no handcuffs, no courtroom drama, no moment designed for an audience. What there was, instead, was a public record, permanent, searchable, and accurate. For a woman who had spent years constructing a version of herself that nobody could look at too closely. That was the most precise consequence possible. The world now reflected the truth, not her performance of it. That was enough. 18 months later, the Citation CJ3+ was somewhere over the Carolinas at 31,000 feet on a clear Thursday afternoon. The sky outside the windows was the particular blue that only exists at altitude, deep and still, and without a single cloud in any direction. Darnell sat with a contract open on the tray table in front of him, a Southeast logistics partner he had been courting for 6 months. The terms were good, better than good. Across the aisle, Kwame was reviewing his own document, reading glasses low on his nose, pen moving occasionally in the margins. Neither of them had spoken in 20 minutes. That was the specific comfort of 2 decades of friendship. The silence was never empty. Darnell's phone buzzed on the armrest. A text from Paulette. He opened it. A photo. His niece's birthday party, the backyard full of people he loved. Everyone mid-laugh at something that had just happened off camera, paper streamers, a lopsided cake. His cousin Marcus, making a face in the corner of the frame that had probably been making people laugh since the picture was taken. "We're proud of you, baby. Come home soon." He looked at the photo for a moment, at his mother's handwriting rendered in a text message, carrying the same unhurried weight it always had, at the faces of people who had never needed him to be anything other than what he was. He set the phone face down on the armrest. He looked out the window at the altitude, at the clean, improbable distance between a concrete floor in Akron and this seat, this altitude, this afternoon, at everything it had taken to get here, at everything it had cost him to find out what he was actually building, and for whom, and what he was worth in the hands of someone who had only ever been counting. He thought about all of that. Then he picked up his pen. He returned to the contract in front of him and found the signature line at the bottom of the final page. The plane climbed higher. Below, the clouds closed over everything that was. Above, the sky was clear as evidence and wide as consequence. Darnell Okafor wrote his name on the line, and the ink landed exactly where he meant it to. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.